She endured the deaths of 3 husbands, was betrayed by her cousin Elizabeth I, and ultimately met a gruesome execution. This is the tragic story of Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots. Born in turbulent times in the 16th century, Mary, Queen of Scots, also known as Mary Stuart, had a bizarre start to life. Her father, King James V of Scotland, died when she was only 6 days old, and as his only legitimate heir, baby Mary was immediately crowned Queen of Scotland. However, the kingdom she inherited was far from peaceful. Scotland faced mounting pressure from King Henry VIII of England, who sought to destabilize the nation amidst his dramas of breaking away from the Catholic Church, his many marriages, and his illegitimate children. The rough wooing period saw Henry VIII try to destroy the old alliance between Scotland and France, as the English feared their neighbour would be used as a springboard for the French to invade. Hoping to rewrite foreign policy, he declared war seeking a new alliance: marriage between his 6-year-old son, Edward VI, and the infant Mary Stuart. This would alleviate the threat of Mary as a high-ranking heir and ensure Scotland's loyalty to England. But the Scottish regents, including her French mother Mary Guise, refused the union. Little baby Mary was already at the centre of a political war. At the age of 5, Mary was sent to live at the French court, as she was betrothed to the French Prince Francis II. Upon the death of King Henry II, Mary became Queen of France aged 18. But her husband also died a year later, and her formidable mother-in-law Catherine de' Medici ensured the teenage widow was sent back to her home country. Here she ruled as Mary I of Scotland. Yet the Scotland she returned to was very different to the one she'd left 13 years earlier. A growing faction of Scottish Protestants had sided with the English, who were now under the rule of the Protestant Queen Elizabeth I. Mary, like many Catholics, believed Elizabeth to be illegitimate. They didn't recognise her father Henry VIII's divorce to Catherine of Aragon, and it didn't help her mother, Anne Boleyn, was executed for being a traitorous adulteress. This meant to many Mary Stuart was the rightful heir to the English throne. Mary refused to sign a treaty recognising Elizabeth as the ruler of England, which alarmed the English court. Elizabeth refused to recognise and name Mary as her heir. The rivalry between the two neighbouring queens was palpable. Elizabeth had planned to marry Mary to her favourite prominent advisor Robert Dudley to keep her enemy close. But Mary had plans of her own, and they were sure to anger her cousin. In 1565, she married her half-first cousin, Lord Darnley. This cleverly strengthened her claim to the English throne, as he was the next claimant after her. He was also in line for the Scottish throne, as a descendant of James II. Bonus points that with his male presence, Mary would be more popular as a leader, and together they could produce an heir to secure their line. Aside from the strategy, Mary was head over heels in love, but Darnley proved to be abusive. She refused to grant him the crown matrimonial, so he couldn't be her successor if she died. He was a jealous drunkard who believed Mary was having an affair with her secretary, David Rizzio. Less than a year into their marriage, when Mary was heavily pregnant, she was forced to watch as Darnley had Rizzio stabbed 56 times. Not long after, Darnley was killed by a mysterious explosion at his house. This seemed rather convenient for many who believed Mary had ordered the execution with her close advisor, James Hepburn. Rumours were further ignited when immediately after the trial cleared him of murder charges, James and Mary married. Unfortunately, the third time wasn't the charm for Mary. According to some accounts, James abducted her and forced her hand in marriage, as he had his goal set on being king. The Scots saw this ambition and believed the marriage to be proof that Mary had a hand in Darnley's death. Not surprisingly, it caused outrage, and she was condemned an adulteress and a murderer. This sparked a series of events resulting in a full-blown revolt against the fugitive Mary. The Protestant lords bested her army, and she was imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle, an island fortress. She was forced to abdicate her throne, which was given to her 1-year-old baby son, James. Mary lost her crown, her son and her freedom in one massive blow. Life in captivity was certainly tough for Mary, especially as she gave birth to stillborn twins. She attempted to break out, but her efforts were thwarted, until eventually Mary fled to England in the hopes that the blood she shared with Elizabeth would overcome all their differences. Queen to queen, cousin to cousin, Mary sought protection and helped to regain her power. But now she was on English soil. Elizabeth's problems skyrocketed. Elizabeth was still unmarried and without an heir, so her position was hugely threatened by the presence of her heir presumptive. Brought up in France, a devout Catholic and with a ready-made successor, Mary was an unacceptable claimant and needed to be dealt with. But Elizabeth's own position was delicate, and she was afraid of the implications of legitimizing regicide. In other words, if she killed another queen, what would stop someone doing the same to her? Mary was confined yet again, and this time her cousin would keep her under arrest for 19 long years. However, Mary was still alive, and she represented hope in those planning to topple the Protestant state. In Catholic eyes, she was the legitimate Queen of England, and so she became entangled in plots against Elizabeth. In fact, only a year after she'd sought refuge in England, this fear had materialized into the Rising of the North in 1569. The threat was escalated even further by the international dimension. Her mother was French, and she'd been queen there. What was to stop the French from aiding? 1568's Throckmorton plot planned an invasion led by a French duke aiming to marry Mary and become King of England. Pope Pius V and King Philip II of Spain also evidently exploited Mary's claim to the English throne in the Ridolfi plot in 1571. They hoped to restore the old faith with the full force of the Spanish army. These attempted coups gave Mary hope of regaining her power, but made Elizabeth increasingly anxious. In 1586, Elizabeth's spy master, Sir Francis Walsingham, uncovered incriminating letters between Mary and plotting conspirators, known as the Babington Plot. Elizabeth could no longer lock away her problems. Mary was declared guilty of treason, and Elizabeth herself signed the death warrant. Her last words were even eerier than her address to the courtroom, as she said to the executioner, "I hope you shall make an end to my trouble." But it took him 3 blows to kill Mary. The first and second strikes wedged and severed her head and neck, but left her agonizingly holding on. Finally, the executioner grabbed her famous red hair to display, but it was a wig, and her head fell. By her body, her little beloved dog refused to leave the pools of blood. That was the end of Mary, Queen of Scots, whose life had been inseparably intertwined with the fates of Catholics and Protestants in Scotland, England, France, and arguably wider Europe. Her death, like most of her life, was at the hands of Queen Elizabeth I, a woman she'd never even met. The body and head of Mary, Queen of Scots, are currently interred at Westminster Abbey, where they were brought initially at the request of her son, James. From James's betrayal to all the death that surrounded Mary's story, especially her own demise, she remains a tragic figure to this day.